You're a blacksmith in a fantasy world and notice that as time flies by, the weapons you have to fix or upgrade have become more outlandish and absurd. Right by you/Agus. It's pretty good, but I decided it was time for an upgrade. I peered at the weapon carefully. Gently pulsed it with mana to analyze the composition. Then pulsed it a few more times because I didn't believe what I was seeing. Cast a retrocognition spell just to make sure. This is a single flawless crystal of titanite, forged and annealed inside the furnace of the god of smithing himself, and sharpened with dragonscale abrasive until the edge was a single molecule thick. It is, without a doubt, the finest blade it is physically possible to make from terrestrial metals. Wow, you're good at this. Eris held up the sword and twirled it easily. Yeah, it took a lot of work to get this baby made. It's lasted through some really tough fights, but my damage isn't keeping up, so I need an upgrade. What can you do with it? How am I supposed to upgrade this? I dunno, you're the expert. You didn't have any trouble with the last 3 swords you did for me. The last 3 swords were at least made by humans. I replied. Eris's first sword had been a standard longsword from the Adventurers Guild, and upgrading it had been a simple matter of sharpening it for the first time since he bought it. The second one had been an oversized greatsword, using some advanced alloys to make it light enough to swing around one-handed. The design seemed ridiculous to me, but after he paid me enough money to buy a new forge I was able to anneal the edge and make it considerably sharper. The third one had been the upper limits of my skill. It was an enchanted saber he'd pulled out of an ancient tomb on a different continent. That time I'd had to send off for several books on ancient Idrishan enchantment runes, and it took me days, slowly cutting new runes with a tiny chisel, but I'd managed to align it to his essence and let him swing it about 10% faster. Small gains, but apparently they mattered when you were an adventurer of his level. Now he'd come back from another adventure, bags of holding loaded with treasures, and holding a sword the likes of which had never been forged by human hands. And he still wanted me to upgrade it. Look, you're at the peak of what's physically possible to do with metal. There's no more worlds to conquer. Everything hits a limit eventually. He shrugged. I haven't hit it yet. There's always another fight. I saved a village, then I saved a city, then I saved a kingdom, but people still need saving. So I keep fighting, I keep getting stronger, and eventually my sword isn't good enough to keep up with my strength, and I come back to you for an upgrade. Hasn't failed me yet. Aren't you? Aren't you tired? I said, wonderingly. Eris sent letters home to his parents, occasionally, talking about the places he'd been. He'd been traveling for over a decade now. He'd visited every kingdom I'd heard of, a few that I'd hadn't, and one which I thought had collapsed 1,000 years ago but was apparently still kicking. And he'd never stopped. Whatever was driving him forwards, it hadn't run out yet. Nope. There's always something new on these adventures. What are you even fighting, that this sword isn't cutting well enough for you? Dragons? Gods? Creatures of the accursed void? All of the above? I'm currently trying to get into a vault protected by the magically embodied concept of destruction. Some sort of living spell invented by a dead wizard. It's pretty hard to cut that. I must have seemed lost for words. He placed the sword back down on the counter, casually. You know, I don't think you've hit your limit yet, either. I think I've hit it pretty decisively. Did you hear what I just said? You said the same thing after I brought back the Idrishan Reaper. Then you thought about it for 5 minutes, gave me a list of books you needed, and a month later you doubled the power of the enchantments. You're asking me to improve on literal perfection. The best metal in existence shaped by the best craftsman possible. I'd need something that doesn't exist. A sword that's not made out of metal at all, maybe solidified mana, or maybe an enchantment that manifests the concept of perfection. I scowled as I realized what I'd talked myself into. Alright, fine. I've got a fetch quest for you. I need you to go back to the Forge God and get me a few upgrades to my furnace. I need a consultation with the Royal Enchanter of Grandmere, and I need you to find me an ingot of a metal that doesn't exist. Eris scrawled a couple of notes in his journal, and nodded. Can do. See you in a few months.